He was supposed to be the next Bruce Lee, disciplined, fast, and untouchable. But what began as a martial arts fairy tale quickly turned into a high-stakes balancing act between fame, power, and politics. From Boston street fights to the palaces of Beijing, Donnie Yen's journey was anything but smooth. There were clashes on set, controversies off camera, and a political stance that divided millions. This is not just the story of a kung fu master. It's the untold saga of a man who fought everyone, including himself, to stay on top. Welcome to Criminal Tracks. Subscribe for more. Long before Donnie Yen became a household name or a cinematic symbol of discipline and power, his life was marked by constant movement and cultural friction. Born in 1963 in Guangzhou, China, Donnie was the son of Bo Sim Mark, a celebrated wushu master, and Kleister Yen, a newspaper editor and amateur musician. His mother's reputation in martial arts meant that discipline wasn't just taught at home. It was the air he breathed. From an early age, Donnie was immersed in traditional Chinese martial arts, and the expectations were crushing. But it wasn't China that would define him. When he was still a young boy, his family moved first to Hong Kong, then eventually settled in Boston, Massachusetts. This relocation thrust Yen into a world vastly different from the one he'd known, one where racial tensions, language barriers, and street culture shaped his teenage identity as much as martial discipline ever had. In Boston's inner city, Donnie found himself navigating the delicate balance between his strict upbringing and the gritty reality of American youth. He wandered the streets, got into fights, and fell in love with breakdancing, hip-hop, and boxing. He wasn't a model student, often skipping class and pushing boundaries, which eventually led to his parents sending him to Beijing to train at the Chinese Wushu Academy, a decision that would pivot his entire life. There, he trained under government-sponsored masters and honed a unique athletic form of wushu that fused power with cinematic grace. This phase gave him not only technical superiority, but also a taste of performance, a hint of how martial arts could become art, even spectacle. But before the spotlight, there were closed rooms and cold auditions. When he returned to Hong Kong in the early 1980s, it was his connection to his mother's friend, Yuen Woo-ping, the iconic action choreographer behind Jackie Chan's and Jet Li's early successes, that gave him his first real shot. Woo-ping cast Yen in Drunken Tai Chi, 1984, a low-budget martial arts film that, while not a massive hit, introduced a new kind of physicality to the genre. Donnie Yen was fast, fluid, and brimming with youthful aggression. His screen presence was raw, different, but lacked the charm and polish that the Hong Kong audience had grown accustomed to with stars like Jackie Chan. For years, Yen found himself typecast. The silent fighter, the stoic villain, the sidekick who rarely got the girl. He was in the room, but never at the center of it. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, Yen continued working tirelessly, often starring in B-list action films or choreographing fight scenes that were far better than the films themselves. Though talented, he struggled to find a niche. Hong Kong cinema was evolving rapidly, with stars like Chow Yun-fat and Stephen Chow dominating genres that veered away from traditional kung fu. Yen's commitment to authenticity, wanting every punch to land with purpose, every fight to tell a story, was admirable, but it didn't translate to box office numbers. The industry wanted charisma and humor. Yen brought intensity and perfectionism. It wasn't just the market that rejected him at times. Yen's own ambition occasionally became his obstacle. Known even then for being meticulous on set, he often clashed with directors and crew over choreography or character direction. He wasn't easy to work with, and in an industry that favored compromise and speed, his precision made him a liability. By the mid-1990s, Donnie Yen found himself fading from the scene. Hong Kong's film industry was in decline, struggling with piracy and shifting audience tastes. Many of Yen's contemporaries had either broken into Hollywood or transitioned into television, but Yen remained in limbo, too Western for traditional roles, and too Chinese for the Western market. The frustration was evident. In interviews from that period, he spoke candidly about his disappointment, about being overlooked. But instead of quitting, he pivoted. He began taking behind-the-scenes roles, choreographing fights for films that needed the edge only he could provide. He traveled to Germany to star in The Princess Blade, worked on Western productions like Highlander, Endgame, and began to quietly build a reputation as one of the best martial arts minds in the business. Even if the face on the poster wasn't always his, the punches often bore his signature. It wasn't until the early 2000s that Donnie Yen began carving a path back to the top. His roles in Blade 2 and Hero showed that he could thrive in both Hollywood and art house cinema. But it was SPL, Sha Po Lang in 2005, a gritty, violent crime film, that truly brought him back into the spotlight in Asia. His fight scene with Sammo Hung was brutal, stylish, and emotionally charged, earning him critical praise and cementing his status as a master not just of martial arts, but of action storytelling. For the first time in years, the audience was seeing Donnie Yen, not just as a fighter, but as a full-fledged actor with depth and fire. Still, his resurgence was far from complete. He needed one role that would define him, something that would elevate him from cult hero to legend. And in 2008, that role came: Ip Man. The film, based on the life of Bruce Lee's real-life mentor, allowed Yen to merge every facet of his identity. The martial artist, the performer, the disciplined thinker, and the Chinese cultural symbol. His portrayal was elegant and explosive, humble and commanding. Suddenly, Donnie Yen was everywhere. On posters, in commercials, in sequels. The man who had spent decades fighting for a place in the industry had finally become its face. But the journey there was long, filled with years of rejection, constant reinvention, and a burning desire to prove he wasn't just another martial artist in a crowded field. From the streets of Boston to the training halls of Beijing, from overlooked sidekick to national icon, Donnie Yen's first act was not just a story of skill. It was a fight for identity in a world that constantly tried to fit him into a mold he never quite belonged to. With the success of Ip Man, Donnie Yen had finally stepped into the spotlight he'd long fought for. He wasn't just acting anymore, he was leading an entire genre back to life. Martial arts films, once dismissed as outdated, were being redefined by his performances. Yen became the face of a cinematic revival. But with fame came friction. Behind the scenes, the man who had spent decades being ignored was now making sure no one could ignore him. On set, Yen demanded precision. He wasn't content to be just a star. He wanted control over choreography, direction, and even editing. That level of involvement sometimes clashed with directors and co-stars who didn't share his relentless pursuit of perfection. Rumors started swirling in the industry that Donnie Yen was difficult to work with. Some said he was a perfectionist. Others whispered he was a control freak. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between. His working relationship with co-stars often soured. Vincent Zhao, another martial arts actor, publicly clashed with Yen during the filming of Special Identity in 2012. The production was plagued by delays and creative disagreements, with Zhao eventually being replaced entirely. Reports suggested the conflict stemmed from Yen's alleged attempts to rewrite scenes and dominate fight choreography. While Yen never directly responded to the controversy, his silence spoke volumes. Industry insiders took note, and his reputation as a collaborative partner became a topic of quiet debate. Some admired his dedication. Others avoided working with him altogether. Even as his reputation in Hong Kong cinema grew more complicated, Yen's global appeal was expanding. Hollywood was calling again. He appeared in Rogue One, a Star Wars story, in 2016, playing Chirrut Imwe, a blind warrior monk who stole the hearts of audiences worldwide. It was a rare moment, a Chinese actor in a major Star Wars film, commanding attention not through stereotypes, but sheer charisma. Yen didn't just play the role, He reportedly requested changes to the script to make the character deeper, more culturally respectful. For that, he received praise. But even that success couldn't shield him from the growing political storm brewing back home. In 2019, Hong Kong erupted into protest against the proposed extradition bill that would allow citizens to be sent to mainland China for trial. The protests were fierce, prolonged, and deeply personal for many Hong Kongers, including those in the entertainment industry. As celebrities took sides, silence became a statement. But Donnie Yen didn't stay silent. He publicly expressed support for the Chinese government, calling the protests a riot and backing Beijing's narrative. For some, it was an unforgivable betrayal. Fans who had once seen Yen as a product of Hong Kong's cultural pride now labeled him a sellout. Hashtags calling for boycotts of his films trended on Chinese and Western social media alike. His name, once synonymous with kung fu purity, was suddenly politicized. Yen doubled down on his stance, attending China's National Day celebrations in Beijing, and even serving as a member of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, a move seen by critics as aligning fully with the Chinese Communist Party. This alignment didn't just cost him fans, it split his career down the middle. In China, he was embraced as a national hero. In Hong Kong and the West, he was viewed with suspicion. Interviews began to shift. In Chinese media, he was asked about patriotism and duty. In Western media, those questions were sidestepped or carefully edited. The Donnie Yen brand became two-faced. One version for Beijing, another for the rest of the world. The fallout was swift. In 2023, Yen was invited to join the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences as a presenter at the Oscars. Almost immediately, a petition began circulating online, protesting his involvement due to his comments on the Hong Kong protests. Tens of thousands of signatures flooded in, accusing the Academy of platforming someone who had supported authoritarian crackdowns. The Academy did not rescind the invitation, and Yen took the stage, but the damage to his global image was done. He was no longer just a martial arts actor. He was a symbol of something much larger and much more divisive. Through it all, Yen kept working. He joined the cast of John Wick, Chapter 4, as Kane, a blind assassin. His performance was widely praised, with critics highlighting his screen presence and fight choreography. But even that role brought its own controversy. Before production, Yen reportedly voiced concerns about the Asian stereotypes in the script and pushed for changes, a move that seemed noble on the surface, but was interpreted by some as strategic reputation management. Was he genuinely trying to improve representation, or was he trying to repair the image he'd tarnished with his political affiliations? Opinions remained divided. Back home, his relationship with Hong Kong's film industry remained strained. While he continued to produce and star in Chinese-backed films, many of his former collaborators in Hong Kong chose not to work with him. He was too famous to be ignored, but too polarizing to be embraced. For every blockbuster he headlined, there were murmurs of discontent behind closed doors. Former crew members spoke of tense sets, last-minute rewrites, and domineering behavior. Directors complained of Yen's insistence on controlling every frame. For some, it was excellence. For others, it was ego. And yet, despite the friction, Yen's influence could not be denied. His choreography redefined modern martial arts cinema. He introduced rhythm and fluidity where others relied on brute force. His characters, disciplined, honorable, yet emotionally restrained, offered a contrast to the wild, unpredictable style of action heroes before him. He brought elegance to violence and made kung fu cool again. In a way, the very traits that made him difficult, his perfectionism, his demand for control, his obsession with detail, were the same traits that elevated his work. But at what cost? As Donnie Yen stepped into the third act of his career, the spotlight had grown hotter. He had built an empire, but the foundations were increasingly controversial. He was admired, resented, applauded, and boycotted, often all at once. And behind his composed public demeanor, one question lingered. Could a man so obsessed with control survive in an industry that thrived on chaos? In the aftermath of global acclaim and political backlash, Donnie Yen found himself in a position few actors ever reach. Worshipped by fans across continents, yet increasingly entangled in the contradictions he once seemed to rise above. With every new project, his dual identity as both cinematic legend and political figure only deepened. His appearances in Hollywood blockbusters like John Wick 4 and Rogue One brought him into the living rooms of Western audiences, while state-sponsored media in China praised his patriotism and loyalty. But beneath the accolades, a more complicated narrative simmered, one shaped by curated public image, commercial interest, and ideological compromise. Yen's online presence began to reflect this balancing act. On Western-facing platforms like Instagram, he shared family moments, martial arts philosophy, and behind-the-scenes footage, warm, apolitical, and aspirational. But on Chinese social media, he was far more vocal about national pride, sharing messages of support for the military, the government, and culturally approved narratives. The contrast was striking. His fans began to notice. Some defended him as a man merely adapting to different audiences. Others accused him of playing both sides, a chameleon prioritizing market access over personal convictions. These tensions also extended to his branding. Yen marketed himself as a symbol of discipline, a humble student of the martial arts who honored tradition while embracing evolution. Yet his career choices increasingly suggested an eye for commercial dominance. He lent his name to luxury watch campaigns, fitness products, and even his own martial arts schools. In interviews, he emphasized the value of family and hard work, but rarely addressed the controversies that now defined his public persona. When asked about the 2019 Hong Kong protests, he dismissed the topic as politicized noise. When questioned about the Academy petition, he offered no comment. To some, it was strategic silence. To others, it was cowardice masquerading as professionalism. Financially, Donnie Yen had become one of the richest actors in Asia. Estimates suggest he earns over $20 million per film, with ownership stakes in several production companies. He resides in luxury properties in both Hong Kong and Beijing, and often travels via private jet. This level of wealth and privilege stood in contrast to the image he had once cultivated, that of the underdog, the martial artist who came from nothing and fought his way up through grit alone. Critics began to point out the irony. The man who portrayed Ip Man, a humble kung fu master devoted to honor and simplicity, was now living a life of opulence built on brand deals, political ties, and global contracts. Still, it would be a mistake to dismiss Yen's legacy as purely opportunistic. His impact on martial arts cinema is both measurable and monumental. He pushed the boundaries of choreography, transforming fight scenes into cinematic poetry. His timing, movement, and ability to fuse styles from wushu to Brazilian jiu-jitsu to MMA redefined what martial arts could look like on screen. While other stars leaned on charisma, Yen leaned on authenticity. And it paid off. Directors from both East and West sought his input on stunts, angles, and sequences. Younger action stars often credited him as their benchmark. In that sense, Donnie Yen didn't just follow in Bruce Lee's footsteps, he expanded the path. But the price of mastery was steep. Yen's reputation for creative control grew sharper with age. On set, he was known to rework entire scripts, restage fight scenes, and challenge directors when he felt the vision wasn't aligned with his standards. While some collaborators praised his commitment, others found it suffocating. A director who worked with him on a recent Chinese production described him as a general in his own war, implying that working with Yen meant yielding power. That iron grip, once seen as a sign of passion, now read as dominance. The industry adapted, or walked away. What makes Donnie Yen's story so compelling is not just his talent or tenacity, but the paradox he represents. He is a man who preaches humility but demands control, a champion of tradition who thrives in modern spectacle, a symbol of Chinese cultural pride who often operates within Western commercial systems, and perhaps most of all, a figure who speaks of balance, but whose life appears deeply unbalanced by politics, ego, and the pursuit of perfection. His critics accuse him of selling out, of towing the party line to protect his business empire. His supporters call him a patriot, a modern hero who never forgot his roots. But both views simplify a man who, like many legends, contains multitudes. What remains undisputed is that Donnie Yen changed the game. In an era where martial arts films risked becoming museum pieces, he brought them roaring back to life. He reminded audiences that elegance could still be dangerous, that restraint could be powerful, and that a single performer, through sheer force of will, could shift an entire genre. Whether audiences love or loathe him, they watch him. And in the age of hypervisibility, that may be the greatest power of all. In the end, the story of Donnie Yen is not just one of success or scandal, but of contradiction. He is the disciplined rebel, the humble egotist, the action star who refuses to let anyone else direct the punches. His life offers no easy moral. It is not a tale of good versus evil, but of choices made under pressure, identities shaped by global scrutiny, and the fragile art of staying true to oneself while playing to the crowd. Whatever history decides about Donnie Yen Jidan, one thing is clear. His story was never meant to be clean. It was meant to be fought for. Donnie Yen built a global empire with his fists, but it's the silence between the strikes that reveals who he truly is. His story is one of brilliance tainted by contradiction, legacy shaped by loyalty, and fame haunted by control. He was never just an actor. He was a symbol, a strategist, a survivor. But the question still lingers. In his pursuit of perfection, what did Donnie Yen lose along the way? For more deep dives into the truth behind the legends, subscribe to Criminal Tracks, where every star has a darker side.